Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 149th episode of the Truth Island podcast. Perhaps one of the strangest branches of philosophy is solipsism, which states that the only thing to exist for sure is one's mind, and that everything outside of the mind may or may not be real. On one hand, this philosophy is uniquely positive, as the mind is always in control of labeling external events as either good or bad. For example, a thunderstorm is neither good or bad, but rather relies on the interpretation of the individual to make sense of the occurrence. However, an even more strict interpretation of this philosophy would suggest that not only is the mind more valuable, it is perhaps the only thing that is real. For example, what if you were to find out that you yourself were the only human being that was in existence? You were the only one that was ever happy, suffered, fell in love, or felt lonely, and that everyone and everything was simply a figment of your imagination. Helping to assure me that I am not the only human in existence, I am once again joined by Kenny, or so I think. Kenny, Kenny, what say you? Do you think that I'm actually a real person, or once this Zoom call disconnects, I simply vanish into the oblivion?
I don't know, Aaron. You tell me. Yeah. So I mean, it's a pretty interesting idea, and it can be fun to tinker around with. So the and I guess this is what we're here to do is answer the question of or at least deal with it as best as we can is how do you prove that other people exist? How do you prove that you're not the only person in who actually exists? And I think that's going to be pretty fun.
Okay, before we even get into the proof stuff, I just want to have a little fun, and I think this would actually make a great science fiction novel of what that would actually mean if you were the only real person and everyone else was just a simulation or fake or just a part of your imagination. And there's actually some very dark implications of what that would actually mean. So, if you were the only real person, what that would mean is that the person that you're talking to only exists while you are seeing and you are hearing them. Once you turn around, they no longer exist. They are completely gone. Like they just completely fade. And why that's so crazy and dark is imagine you're sitting at home and your wife comes home and she says, "Oh, Kenny, I had such a hard day. These things happened, and it was this and that." If you're the only person that truly exists, that means that everyone else's suffering is imaginary. Your wife actually did not suffer because she's not real. So, what that would mean is I think that this would lead someone to become the utmost narcissist because only my happiness is real. Only my suffering is real. Like if I'm bored, only I'm bored. So I think that's incredibly dark that if you were to actually adapt this philosophy, you would completely negate the pain and suffering of everyone else because you would just say, oh, well, as long as I'm not looking at them, they are no longer real.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually pretty normal for human behavior. We kind of already live that way. So you take the average person and ask them, hey, do you know your neighbors? Well, most often, a lot of the time people really haven't really, they haven't met their neighbors, and it's almost like they're living in this weird limbo where they're the only person in the neighborhood. Of course, they've seen people walking their dogs or, pushing kids on a stroller. But they live in that sense that, these are not actual human beings that I should go and introduce myself to. And, we often think that our pain and suffering is actually far more real and far more should be far more sympathized with than anybody else's. So we we already kind of are solipsists, and but you're right. The implications, if we actually think about it in the sense of if we follow this to its utmost end, then it is a pretty not only dark but dark in the sense of total abandonment of the other, but also this aloneness. You are totally alone in this video game, in this cosmic simulation, in this illusion of, of, of matter. But it only takes a bit of a wink and a shake to, I would say, uh, knock it all sideways.
Okay. I actually love what you said that most people are already practicing this philosophy already, and they just don't know it. They're actually practicing this philosophy, but they don't know it. And here's how. We tend, like, if you can't empathize with another human being, in a way, you're kind of negating their existence. I feel like billionaires are doing a really good job of practicing this philosophy right now because it's like, well, if I don't see my workers suffering, if I don't see them working these long hours or whatever, it must not be real. And I think all of us do this to some degree. It could be our neighbors, or it could just be, I mean, there, for example, are so many like I was just reading this article about all of the child labor that's still going on when it comes to manufacturing a lot of our electronics. Like even though
Mm.
we're in 2021, we're still relying heavily on child labor to manufacture so many of our electronics. And there isn't a bigger outrage about this because we don't actually know or see those people. Like we are actually following we're actually following this philosophy of like, well, if I don't see the child laborer, they must not be real. They must not exist. So in a way, we're kind of in, a lot of us are indirectly practicing this, whereas if we don't see a person suffering, we automatically assume it must not be real. And, that's incredibly selfish to say, but we kind of indirectly do this every single day.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it's a testament to just how selfish we can be as human beings. But on the other hand, it makes sense because you cannot, you don't live in those countries. For example, when you hear about the war in Afghanistan, and you think seriously, it's almost like this far away imaginary war until it comes home. So my point is simply that we can't carry the reality of the implications of everybody's suffering and every government wrongdoing and every sleazy CEO messing around, in one country or the other, because the toll will be way too much on us, and we often overreact and end up making the situations worse when we go about trying to solve our neighbors' problems without any wisdom or understanding. So I would say that there's a part of this this idea that's actually pretty helpful. So the idea of dealing with the person in front of you, if while they're in front of you they exist, fine, but when they're gone, is sort of like a coping mechanism, a way that we can deal with the world and not carry too much burdens on our shoulder.
Okay, well, I'm going to challenge a few points here. So I think before you start necessarily worrying about the child laborer, you first need to learn how to deal with the people that are actually physically in your life, your
Mm.
kids, your wife. Like if you can't learn to empathize with those people, the people that you interact with every single day, there's no way that you're going to be able to generate the empathy skills to empathize with a child laborer in India, for example. Now, here's where I think it's important to kind of worry about or concern yourself with other people when they're not in your immediate presence. So let's say, for example, you have a wife and you know she's going to have a really tough day at work. Like she's been talking about this for a week. She said Wednesday's the day of the big meeting, the big client, whatever it is, right? So your wife has been telling you for a week that Wednesday is going to be a particularly tough day.
Mm.
If you are mindful of her suffering, even when she's away, like you don't see your wife at work. I know with like the pandemic, people are working at home, but let's just assume that she's going to her office or whatever. You don't actually physically see her in that office. You don't physically see her at work. But if you're thinking about your wife and you're thinking about the suffering that she might have on Wednesday, that can allow you to change your behavior of like, you know what? I'm going to have dinner all ready. I'm going to have it all prepared when my wife comes home. So, she doesn't have to worry about that. Or I'm going
Yeah.
to take out the garbage, or I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, so that when she comes home, she's going to just have an idyllic experience. Now, a person who cannot visualize their wife's suffering on work on Wednesday isn't going to do any of those things. He's just going to be like, well, I don't see the boss yelling at her. I don't see the coworkers yelling at her. I don't see the client freaking out. And they're just going to, be selfish, and they're just going to do what they normally would do. They'll be like, well, I planned on playing video games all Wednesday long, and that's what that person would do. So I think that we have an obligation to kind of break free of that shell of what we directly see and encounter in order to become better human beings.
Yeah, to some extent, yes. Because you want to understand that the sufferings of other people is actually, it's a real thing. They are actually going through either an incredible amount of pain or an incredible amount of joy. So, but the idea is simply, does solipsism allow you to do that? Can you, if you're the only one who exists, if you can only prove that you exist and are not anybody else, then why does it matter? Why should it matter to, to not only, to want to be a good human, to want to be a better human being, sure, but to also, why should it matter? Why should it matter that, that your wife or your kid is not doing well in either their workplace or school and so forth? Because if they're all simulations and they're not real, if they're not real, there's just they'll just press the restart button and everything's okay again. Speaking that when we put ourselves aside and we actually consider and we actually believe that other people are human beings and they do have real pains and real joys and real sufferings and real aspirations, then it becomes necessary, it becomes important to care and to help where you can help, and encourage where you can encourage.
Okay, I can see that you want to get into the proof of this, but I'm still just wanting to have more fun of like, what would this world be like? So before we get to the proof, another implication of this would also be that all of history is fake. So if you're the only person that actually exists, everything that happens before your existence or everything that happens after your existence is also just imaginary. It's just a figment of your imagination. And to kind of start addressing why this would be problematic for you as a person, I just don't understand how anyone would not be highly depressed every single day of their life. If they knew, like, for example, if you're a person, right? And let's say you're working a long 15-hour day of work and you're really suffering. If you were the only person on the face of the earth, then you have to deal with the fact that you're the only one that's actually feeling pain in that moment, because everyone around you, they just vanish into thin air. They're not actually putting in the 15 hours of work. Only you're putting in that 15 hours of work. Everyone just vanishes, and then they magically reemerge when you start seeing and hear them again. So, and the same thing with pleasure. If you're at an amusement park or doing something really fun, you have to kind of live with the fact that only you're having fun. All of those other people are just simulations, or they're just imaginary entities just riding the roller coaster with you. So I don't see anyone lasting in this philosophy for very long without really hating the nature of their own existence. I don't see how that would be possible to really exist here and just know, like, this is all for me. This whole thing is just for me, and that no one else is having a shared experience with you. I just find that to be incredibly depressing. And that everything that you learned in history, all of the horrific things or whatever, none of it ever happened. I mean, how would one even begin to live in a world such as that?
It's a very lonely existence, and it's a very unhappy existence, and it's an existence with a lot of consequences that seem to be more of a detriment to the individual. So yeah, if history is not, I mean, if you're the only being in existence, then absolutely, yeah, history is just a load of bollocks. And not only that, But all your quote unquote meaningful relationships aren't really meaningful. They're just figments of the necessary, whatever the necessary simulation of this weird imaginary cosmos. And so it's a very lonely and unhappy existence.
The other thing about this philosophy is like I can't see a way where you don't become pure evil. And here's why. Because if everyone else's suffering is imaginary or fake, then the incentive structure is for you to be as wicked to people as humanly possible so that you mitigate your own suffering. So like if like let's say you force your wife to do something for 20 hours, or you force her to do something highly unpleasant, you would just be thinking in the back of your mind, well, it's better off that she does it because she's fake and I'm real. Therefore, you kind of start delegating all suffering onto other people because in your mind, you believe that they are all fake. So there's no way that this doesn't turn to you just basically creating misery wherever you go, because your basic operating principle is that I'm real, everyone else is fake. Therefore, all the fake people should do all of the drudgery and all of the suffering, and I should have none of that on my plate.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that because, what's the point of being good to things that don't exist? What's the point of being kind? I mean, I would say that there is still a point, but often I think, when it comes to human nature, we tend to drift far easily towards the negative or the dark or the selfish way of, going about things. Because there could be a solipsist out there who is dealing with the world in a sense of he knows or he believes that everything is in fact, he can't prove the fact that anybody else exists. And so he's, nothing matters, but still he wants to interact with his world in a sense, in a way that is somewhat beautiful. He or she still sees that, he still sees the world as something that there's still some participation in it. It may not mean anything, but there's participation nonetheless, and it's better than better than being isolated and and unhappy.
Maybe there would be a solipsist who treats these imaginary avatars well. The solipsist knows full well that if he treats other people well, they're not real, but maybe just for his own comfort, he just wants these
Yeah,
imaginary characters to have good lives. Could be, could be possible, but I would still venture to say that when push comes to shove, he's going to be like, well, I'm the only real person, therefore I'm the most supreme. And not only would that person say that, they would say, if I'm taken out, if I die, then all of these other imaginary figures are gone as well. So I think that person would still put their life as being the supreme life because they know that if they're taken out, all of the other imaginary figures also die with them.
yeah. My idea is possible, just not probable.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
because when we're dealing, yeah, it's the natural consequences of of thinking that you're the most important or the only being of any substance whatsoever. We squash insects when they're an inconvenience to us.
Mm.
I don't see why it would be any different for to get rid of an agent that really isn't an agent, an imaginary agent that's an inconvenience to you in one way, shape, or form.
Yes, within the confines of the law, obviously, because even if you're the only person in existence, all of the imaginary people could still throw you in jail and
Yeah,
make you and
yeah,
make you suffer there, you know?
yeah, yeah, which is an interesting part of this of this idea. It's yeah, it's like you're not real, but man, that punch really felt real. And it's like, okay.
You know what this is like? It's like imagine, like you have a little girl or a little kid, and they're having a tea party with their stuffed dolls. Well, imagine like they know the stuffed dolls are fake, but they still have to play the rules of the game. You know how it's like even though I know that this doll is stuffed and fake, I still have to treat it nicely, right? Because there's still consequences in this imaginary world. That's crazy.
That's just yeah, that's wild. That's just wild. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's very interesting. Very interesting.
And this never, like, honestly, I learned about this philosophy once in college, and then it was never talked about again. I've never heard a podcast about it. I've never, it's like even the Wikipedia article is completely barren on this subject matter. It's like there's very little there. I don't I feel like people are really petrified of talking about this. I think that if it was true, the implications of it would be just too much for people to handle. And that's why it kind of, so I appreciate you going here. Okay, now we're going to get to the proof aspect, which I think you're a little more eager to get to.
No,
So
I doubt it, but I don't see, I don't think, I don't see,
you don't see a way out of
I
this.
don't know. I don't know how I gave you that impression, but no, please go on.
All right, we'll talk a little bit about the proof. Okay, so first we have to prove that we are real. Like we have to prove that we're not the imaginary person, right? And that's the first step. And the way that we do that is with Descartes, who famously said, "I think, therefore I am." And what does that mean? What does the phrase "I think, therefore I am" actually mean, according to Descartes? Well, we're alive 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yes, we fall asleep for 7 or 8 hours, most of us, right? But if you really wanted to, you could actually stay awake for 24 hours at a time. You absolutely could. And you're the only one, like you are the only one that you are fully with at all times.
Mm.
That's a really crazy fact about our existence. It's like even if you were married to your wife for 50 years, as soon as you go into the bathroom, you are now separated from your wife. And you don't know that your wife is on the other end of that door. You only know that you're on the other end of the door sitting on the toilet, right? So you are the only one that you travel with throughout the duration of your life. And that's kind of proof that you exist. Kenny, do you think that's sufficient enough proof that you yourself exist? The fact that you have to live with yourself 24/7?
Yeah, I mean, so I went through through the task of proving my own existence to myself not too long ago,
Oh,
and
wow. Okay. You were doubting your own existence. Okay. Well,
I just wanted to make, I just wanted to make sure, okay,
okay.
um, because there was a time,
We're good.
there's a time a man takes a massive dump and you realize, my goodness, if if I do exist, I've shamed myself ridiculously because what just came out of my butt is ridiculous. But, so the idea for me, the idea personally is experience and exertion. E plus E equals E. Experience plus exertion equals existence. So that experience, that which I observe, take in, that which comes to me through my senses, touch, smell, all these things. So what I experience, I and I can, how you say, I can make inferences based on those kinds of things, based on what I experience. So if I bump into something, I know that there is an object in front of me, and if there's an object in front of me that I feel, it means that there's an agent, there's an agency between, there's an agency within myself that allows me to experience this object, and therefore it's not only I that exists, but this object also exists. But I'm the one, as far as I know, I'm the one who is experiencing it. I consciously processing it in my in my mind jellies. So consciously processing it in my mind jellies, and I know that I'm having what we collectively call an experience, describe an experience as an experience. So what I see, what I taste, what I touch, smell, and so forth. Fine. Is that enough? Is that enough to say, okay, that I exist because I experience things? Well, personally, I don't think so, because cats experience things, dogs experience things. I mean, even the objects that I touched experienced the touch, whether it consciously experienced it or not, it still experienced it. There was a coming together of matter. So the second part for me is now exertion. Okay, I'm a thinking, breathing being, which means that I have some mobility, some force, some initiative in this world. So I move my hands, I talk, I bob my head back and forth. I can see myself moving about, and I have agency in the world to do whatever I please to do. And so these two things combined, experience plus exertion, proves to me personally that I am an active living agent, because I process these things with my mind jellies, and although people call it consciousness, but so that's where I would go for mine.
Okay. So I'm going to take 3 steps backwards, and it's going to be really annoying and it's going to be really frustrating, but I feel like I have to do this.
Please
So
do.
I actually think that a part of me does not exist. I'm going to explain how this is the case. You have, okay, let's say a man goes to the gym on Tuesday, and on Tuesday he feels the burn in his muscles and he says, this feels great. I can feel my muscles growing. I feel progress. I feel growth. And he catalogs that experience as a positive thing. He feels the burn in his muscles and catalogs that workout session or that sensation as positive. Then let's say the very next day he goes back to the gym, does that same exact workout, feels the same exact burn in his muscles, but for whatever reason, he catalogs that burn, even though it was identical to the burn the previous day, as pain. Like, oh man, I must have strained myself. Oh, I've pushed that too far. It's like, in some way, your experience is not fully objective and it's not fully real. Because assuming, and I know it's impossible for this to happen, but just bear with me for a second, if that sensation that the man felt in his muscles was identical on Tuesday as it was on Wednesday, his mind is actually creating false impressions of what actually happened. Because on Tuesday, he cataloged that sensation as growth or something positive or like a good sensation. But on Wednesday, he cataloged that sensation as pain and suffering. So our sensations are very dependent on our subjective matter. Like, and this is for everything that goes through life. Like, there's like, you could look back at your past and say, oh my God, I was bullied in high school and that destroyed my self-esteem. It destroyed my self-confidence. 5 years later, you might look back and say, I was bullied in high school and that allowed me to overcome that obstacle. So we are constantly shuffling and recataloguing our experiences based on our subjective matter. So a lot of what we perceive, I would argue, is actually not real. It's very subjective.
That's fine, but the we still perceive it. Now, how we choose to classify it or categorize it is a different matter, but the perception is there. So if just like your for your example, the man who goes to the gym and feels the pain, feels the burn and decides to categorize it as good, well, he felt the pain. It's still something that he processed. The very fact, the very nature of his processing means that there is a how you say there is a thing happening. It is not a no thing. It is a thing, and because it is a thing, he must address it as a thing. And if he addresses it as a thing, he also has to take into account that there is a process within him that addresses it as a thing. And so it goes back and forth, and the whole nature of trying to prove consciousness. But the idea is simply that, and then he goes back to the gym and he experiences the same, this is possible, right? He experiences the same exact pain, but he categorizes it as bad the next day. Well, he still experienced it. And so it's not so much the categorization or the labeling of what this is, but the experiencing of the physical pain that matters.
What about the case of, let's say, psychosomatic pain? So like in the example that I used with the gym, there was actually a real action that occurred, like the guy did a bicep curl or something. What about somebody who feels as if they have lower back pain, but there was no actual incident that actually led to the catalyst for that back pain? It's just like on Wednesday he just feels like he has that pain, and then on Thursday he doesn't feel like he has that pain. And a lot of like a lot of things, sometimes people feel depressed for no reason, or they fall, like they fall into a funk, or they fall into a mood, and there isn't always like this giant catalyst that happens that is like, oh well, I broke up with my girlfriend, therefore I feel depressed. Sometimes it just kind of happens, and I feel like there are sensations that we all feel, and there isn't necessarily a real external stimuli that's causing that sensation to occur.
Yes, that's possible, but we still feel it. The existence is proved simply by the feeling of it. It doesn't have to be how you say, if it was a rock, the rock would just sit there as a rock, and we would never know. The pain of the rock could exist, and we don't know. But the person who feels either the real pain or the psychosomatic pain is still feeling the pain. It's because that's where the interest is the agent feels something. He's not just numbing, floating through life, numb, feeling nothing, and then because that would be a very interesting situation to be in. But so what I would say is that the very fact that the pain is felt or the depression is felt in the agents is what I'm looking at.
Okay, so I agree with you that whatever you're feeling, your consciousness is real, right? I agree with Descartes that your thoughts of, like, if you say I feel pain, whether that pain has a basis in the external world or does not have a basis in the external world, as far as your consciousness is concerned, that is real pain, or that is real happiness. I guess I guess it would kind of be, it's up to an outside observer to come in and then validate whether your pain is real or false by external standards, right? By your internal, and I know this is getting complicated, but by your internal clock, whatever you feel is real. So if you say I have lumbar, if you say I have back pain, regardless of what the MRI or the X-rays show, if your consciousness perceives you to have lower back pain, as far as your consciousness is concerned, that pain is 100% real. The question is, does what an external entity does the validation of an external entity matter whatsoever? So if a doctor says, hey man, you don't really have lower back pain, does that matter, or do we just trust our own consciousness?
No, I think it does matter because that's what we have, terms like psychosomatic. I think it does matter in the sense of because now we're putting that kind of pain in a certain category, and we're saying this is the kind of pain that the agent seems to feel for, as far as we know, no reason whatsoever. And so it does matter because it helps the patients, it helps the agent say, okay, though I feel it has no external it has no external causes. This is all within me, but it doesn't negate the fact that he or she still feels that pain. So as in the external standards, no, that person should be fine. Absolutely, they should be. Who knows what's going on? But as long as they feel the pain, and the pain is real to them, then within themselves they know they have some proof of their own mind and their own consciousness and at least the existence of their own body. Outside of that is a different story.
One thing I want to also talk about is the opposite of psychosomatic pain. And that is when an individual has actually been afflicted, but they don't perceive there to be pain. And we all know this guy. We all know that guy who like got punched in the face or banged his head and he's gushing blood. And he's like, I don't feel anything. I feel fine, right? Or we know that dude who has the magical ability to go out in the middle of the winter in shorts and an undershirt. And everyone's like, aren't you freezing? And the guy's like, nope, I'm not freezing. I'm totally cool, right? So we also have the inverse of this, of like the guy who everyone on the external world says, dude, there's blood gushing from your forehead. And the guy's like, nope, I don't feel anything. I feel totally fine. Whose opinion is right? Is like if the guy said, if the guy who's gushing blood from his head says, well, I don't feel anything, it's totally, my perception is that I'm totally fine, is that person right? Or does the external world have like some validation to say, no, dude, you know, your head is gushing blood and you might develop an infection?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually heard this so documentary, not I think a couple years back, about a stuntman who didn't have the ability to feel pain, and one of the problems growing up was that they had to keep him from biting off his own tongue because he there was no resistance, and so there was no that internal clock, that internal warning alarm of pain, to keep you from doing what would be harmful to yourself wasn't there. And so as a child, biting off his tongue was one of those, was like, it's super easy, super simple. So to answer your question, well, it gets complicated, but I would say just generally speaking, it's both, because he doesn't feel the pain, and to him, he's fine, and he doesn't feel the threat or the danger, so he's fine. And so when he says he's okay, he means it. He's not he's not scrambling for the hills, but the external forces looking at him and seeing the blood gushing into his eyes and his and all over his face. We're all worried. They're right too, because they have reason to be concerned, because there is his head has been blasted open. Excuse me.
You know?
it's it's something out of a Saturday Night Live skit. He's so I would say that it's both are pointing to a reality, but because we live in a very objective slash my friends and I call it an objective subjective world, in the sense that there are objective things that we encounter, but we're all addressing those things from a very subjective point of view.
Yes.
And so it takes I mean, that's why it's super important for us to have those people who will tell us, yeah, your head is bleeding, man, because we all have places, blind spots, where we don't see, we don't understand, we don't. No man is an island. Oh, no man's an island. um,
No,
uh,
so an interesting area where this actually gets tested out is I've done a little bit of research on Shaolin monks, for example. And in parts of China, there are these monks, for example, who practice martial arts,
yeah,
and they're actually able to develop some pretty cool superhuman like abilities. Like
yeah,
they can train their bodies where you could punch them right in the gut and they can absorb the shock of that. They can break like 10 bricks or whatever it is. Like they're able, like the external world, like if you had an MD, a medical doctor or a scientist come and look at these Shaolin monks, they'd be like, no man, your rib cage is going to break if this happens and this and that. And then these Shaolin monks are able to like do these like almost supernatural like feats that modern science would say no, that's not possible, yet they're able to do it. And they asked them, the Shaolin monk, well, what's the secret? Why is it that someone can punch you in the stomach and you don't break a single rib? And they say that it's building up your consciousness to a level so that you believe it's like it's not so much the like they could do 1,000 push-ups or whatever. It's not the push-ups that are making their bodies physically strong. It's just that they're altering their consciousness in such a way that they truly believe that when that guy punches them in the stomach, it's not going to hurt, and therefore it doesn't hurt. So it's really crazy that like what we believe of ourselves can I'm not saying 100%. It's like we have more wiggle room and we're able to push the boundaries of human limitations based solely on what we believe in. I'm not saying to the point where we can jump off a cliff and fly, but there's actually a lot more wiggle room to our consciousness than what we believe.
yeah. I mean, so if you look at the whole, the placebo effect, it's one of those things that's absolutely very just incredibly fascinating. And this is it's a little bit of a testament to that, in the sense of, what our minds are capable of doing, what our minds are capable of doing in regards to our bodies and how we interact with the world. So I absolutely love that. It's wonderful. And yeah, the case of, monks, or the case of, patients who've taken sugar tablets and found themselves cured of whatever sickness or whatever it may be. It's incredible. And
I was listening to the radio, man, and there was a guy who had a serious like heart condition, like serious heart condition, and he was prescribed like placebo heart medication, and yet his heart rate still went like down to normal or something. I'm like, dude's been taking sugar pills, but just his sheer conviction and his sheer belief that these pills were making a difference actually allowed him to have like a normal heart. And it's just like there needs to be like more investigative work into that, because like at some degree, we're able to negate the external world. Our mind is able to say, like, I'm wondering, like, that guy, let's say there's a guy who gets into a bar fight, and then a
mm,
dude takes a bottle of beer and smashes it over his head. The guy is like bleeding. If the guy truly believes, like, nope, this isn't going to kill me, nope, I don't care how much my forehead is bleeding, I wonder if his sheer willpower can just prevent him from dying, or prevent him from going unconscious, or maybe the blood will just stop. I mean, I'm wondering how far, what is the boundaries, what is the limits of me just believing that like I am not hurt.
that would be a very interesting study, and I think that's more more of a question for brilliant experts, which I am not at all. But, I think that it would be something that I'll be more than willing to look into, because it's fascinating. Yeah, what you hear, the stories of mothers lifting, incredibly large objects,
Yep.
just to save their children, things that they would not in any way in a million years thought they could have, lifted on their own. It's really incredible what the human mind is capable of. And it would be a very, very interesting study. And I think we don't, I don't think we give it as much as attention as it deserves.
See, I think like a lot of those anecdotes and a lot of those stories are like some form of proof that a lot of, like, I think some of those anecdotes are proof that a bit of what we believe to be real about the external world isn't so real, right? And I've heard those stories too, where a guy was trapped under a car that, weighed 2 tons, and some 55-year-old guy with back problems lifted up the car for a few minutes, for a few seconds, and let that guy escape. I'm like, wait a minute. Physics, external world, biology, all of that just got thrown out the window. Just completely got thrown out the window by that 55-year-old lifting up a 2-ton car or whatever it was, and it's like, yeah, yeah, like that's not looking good for the external world. Let's just put it that way. Let's get to the proof stuff here. I believe Descartes that we exist, that I exist, and you've done your own studies that prove that you exist. So we're in agreement that Aaron Azrod exists, Kenny exists. We can say that for yourself.
Well, I can say that for me, absolutely.
Yeah, you can say that for you. You can say that for you, and I can say that about me.
Yeah.
Now the real challenge is, how do I know that you, Kenny, exist? And right, if you are real, how do you know that I exist? How do I know any of this external stuff exists? And I don't think there is a mathematical or logical proof that we're going to arrive at. I don't think we can ever prove that anything outside of ourselves exists. I mean, one argument you could make is just grab a burning stove and you're going to see how real the external world is. Like, go ahead, just grab a burning stove, and then you're going to feel the external world impacting you. Do you think
I,
maybe that's like some evidence that something outside of us exists? Because if nothing outside of us existed when we grabbed a burning stove, theoretically we should just be able to mentally overpower that.
yeah. Oh, oh man. Yeah. It's interesting. It's very interesting because Yeah, it's not one of those things that is you cannot, should I say, it's for me, right, at least at this moment, um come to a certain beyond the doubt proof that, at least philosophically speaking, I would say that somebody else exists, because I mean, you are a subjective being living in a very, very convincing, large and convincing world, but
Convincing.
you're still you're still you're still a limited being.
Yeah.
And so, you can't hop yourself into another person's mind. And this is why, life is very, whether you're a solipsist or not, life at the end of the day is a very lonely existence, because you can't really know another person fully, and no one can ever really know you fully, not even your wife. And so I would say that, yeah, it's very, it's, if not impossible, very difficult, as far as I know, to prove the existence of the other.
But I like what you're kind of saying something pretty clever here. You also don't have enough knowledge to negate the existence of another, right? So,
Voila.
like for example, let's just say that you're a video game sprite, okay, and you're the only playable character, and everyone else is a non-playable character. The playable character sprite doesn't know that the other non-playable characters are real or fake. It's only the person holding the controller who actually knows that this is a video game. So only the real person with their fingers on the joystick knows, okay, this is a playable character sprite, and these
Yeah.
are all non-playable characters. So only they know. But the main character in the video game itself can never fully become aware that they're the only real person. So I think that through that limitation, because I can't prove, Kenny, that you exist, but I also can't prove that you don't exist. So I have to just assume, I have to run this life or run this video game based on the assumption that you are real. And I guess generally speaking, if I assume other people are real, I'm going to be a lot happier. How does that sound?
Yeah, but it's, I think that sounds good, and I think you're right. You will be, I mean, you will be happier. Um, but it's also a matter, of picking the most reasonable conclusion, in sense of the one that gives you the most, how you say. So I can, as much as I'd like unicorns to exist, and I do want unicorns to exist, trust me. As much as I'd like that, I can go spend my whole life searching for one, and I never find one. And I say, well, unicorns and people are just the same. I can't prove they exist, but I can't prove they don't exist. Well, sure, but I've seen people. I've seen people. Dang it, like,
Or so you think you've seen people.
well, no. Well, that's what I'm trying to say, is that even if it's like, I think I've seen people,
Mm,
it's still the most reasonable conclusion. It's still the
yeah.
most, just because if I see a mirage in the desert, sorry, if I'm in the desert and I see water, right? I see water and I tell myself, okay, this could be a mirage, or it could be real, and I don't know, right? I'm not gonna walk away from that mirage, even
Right.
if even if I'm not thirsty. Let's just say I've just drank my last bottle of water. I'm good, I'm not gonna walk away from that mirage, because it may be real. In not the sense that it may be real, because just because it may be real is all about it may be real, absolutely, but not just that. It's, let's just say that, okay, and I know that, certain bodies of water exist in this, in this area. I know that there's probable cause, there's good reason to believe that this is real, but I'm not certain. This is not 100% certain that it is real. I just have knowledge that it is probable that this is real. I'm going to lean towards that mirage and not walk away from it. So what I'm saying is, yeah, though you can't prove absolutely for sure whether the cat is dead or alive,
Yeah.
we need to look. We need to find, okay, where is it leaning? Where is reality leaning? Where is it pushing towards? Is it pushing towards this figment of my imagination? Is it pushing towards, not real, all a simulation, um, all nonsense? Or is it pushing, is it leaning more towards real, meaningful, and, the encountering of others?
Hmm.
Um, and so so that's how I would do it, is just the most reasonable option.
Okay, let me propose this. What about a hybrid solution? And here's my
Okay.
hybrid solution. You're in the middle of the desert and you see water, right? And you don't know it's a mirage or you don't know if it's real. You walk over to the mirage and then you take your water bottle or your canteen and you dip it in. You start drinking that water. But as you're drinking that water, you're like, yeah, tastes a little bit like sand. I think I feel a seashell in my mouth right now, right? And I think one of my teeth, I think my teeth are becoming a little crooked right now, right?
Mhm.
So is it ever perhaps wise to kind of pause and sort of question the external reality just a little bit? Because if you just say, oh, well, if I see water, then therefore it must be water. If you're just immediately just trusting whatever it is that you see, you never leave open the possibility of maybe the external world is wrong. And again, I'm going to go back to the Shaolin monk example. If the Shaolin monk, when they were 10 years old, said, well, according to science, if I get punched in the stomach, I'm going to break my ribs and develop, and my internal organs are going to die, right? If the Shaolin monk went on their default perception of the world from the get-go, then they would never, ever be able to develop any type of supernatural ability. So I'm not saying that you should completely distrust the external world. Do you think it's ever appropriate, though, to have some skepticism of the external world so that you always leave open the possibility that, one, the external world is incorrect, and two, you might actually have like some inner abilities that you may not be like aware of?
Yeah, I mean, questioning the external world is super important. And I think that it's something that we kind of do all the, hope not everybody. I don't think that everybody does this or even should do it, because if you don't care, you don't care. But for those who care and those who wants to, it's very important that you do. But at the end of the day, here's the problem with questioning everything.
Hmm.
Is there are those who question everything and never come to a conclusion about anything. And so that's a very strange and dangerous place to be. So if you're questioning to really understand, to find out, absolutely, please, by all means. And if it leads you towards, yeah, this is real, or it leads you towards, no, this is an illusion, then please, by all, so I would say that it's very important to question, and it's very important. This ongoing skepticism is important, and it kind of keeps us curious, or should I? Maybe yeah. It keeps us curious, and it keeps us, yeah, it keeps us from falling into a lot of different traps and dangers.
I actually like your caveat there. So let me see if I can paraphrase this into some kind of axiom. So if you see water in the desert, trust your eyes and trust your ears, trust your senses. Okay, so the first rule of living in this world is trust your senses fully. However, leave open the possibility that your senses might be deceiving you. So you're not interacting with this world like that's fake, that's fake, that's fake, that's a fake car, that's a fake person, right? Like, because you're going to go crazy pretty darn, you're going to go crazy if you live your life that way. So trust your senses, trust that everything is real, but if something feels a bit off, leave room that things may not be as you perceive them to be. So do you think that's a healthy way of living?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would say so. Yes, but to put it simply, yes, I would say so.
Yeah, because we can't just be living in a world where everything outside of me is fake. Because if you're living that way, one, you're gonna fall into a pretty darn deep depression, and two, you're just, there's a whole world outside of yourself that you're not really interacting with, right? Like, So Okay,
Yeah.
we're over an hour here, so I kind of want to leave off with some takeaways. I think, you can trust that you yourself, the listener, is real, right? Whoever's listening to this, you are real, just letting you know. And I think we can't prove that, we don't have definitive logical mathematical proofs that other people are real. But in order to get the best experience out of this world, assume that everything in the external world is real until proven otherwise. I think regardless of what's actually going on, whether this is a simulation, whether we're just like consciousness, whatever ends up being the case, it really doesn't matter, because in order to live the best possible life that you can get, assuming that others are real and that their suffering, their happiness, their dreams, their sorrow, their regrets are real, is going to create best possible experience for you in this world. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Don't pet a burning dog. That's an American Psycho reference.
All right. Well, thank you so much, my imaginary friend.
You too, Mr. Puggles.
All right, Kenny. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Aaron.
This concludes the 149th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.